Welcome to Coffee Talk Tuesday. My name is Chalese Stevens, and I'm here with Trip Mitchell and our incredible guest, Stacey Bess. And I'm so excited that you were able to come on our show. I have been inspired by you. I saw you speak probably 2.5 years ago and bought your book. And I'm really honored that you're on our show. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
This is the part where I say something stupid, but I'll let you go ahead. Why is Stacey so amazing?
So, Stacey, I'm actually, because you do this for a living, you tell your story, I'm going to let you talk about who you are and why you do what you do and your story.
Okay. Well, I won't tell you how amazing I am, but I will tell you that I have
Your PR person called earlier and said, you guys are so lucky. Stacey is amazing.
So they've done that for me.
Yeah, okay.
So I really kind of landed in this job. I grew up with a mom who worked in a shelter for kids that were getting placed into homes that had been pulled from their own homes, being placed into foster care. And she would bring children home to live with us until they were placed into their homes. And so growing up, we were always being introduced to a child that needed us. And that was kind of, I think, kind of what set the stage for me to want to love a child in need. But I honestly was getting my degree in elementary ed, K-8 education, as a backup. I wasn't going to teach, but I have this really powerful mother and husband who conned me into going to the Salt Lake City School District. And Mom said, hey, it's right before Christmas break. They'll never hire you. And so just go. We just challenge you to go. So I went, and Dr. Manning offered me the job. And he said it is the only school of its kind in the entire country. It is underneath the 6 South Bridge. Drive as far as you can go over the railroad tracks, and then look to your left, and you will see your school. It is a school for the homeless. And I remember saying to him, but sir, I have a degree in elementary ed. I'm not trained to teach grown-ups. And he giggled and said, Miss Stacey, this is a school for homeless children. And you will teach K through 6 all day. Well, I was horrified. Absolutely horrified. I remember going out into my little green Celica in the back of the parking lot, and I held onto the steering wheel as tight as I could, and I laid my head down, and I cried and cried and cried. And I just, all the way home, wiping the tears and the mascara, I kept saying, Mom and Greg, how dare you send me to this place? And I remember walking in the door, and Greg opened up the screen door, and he opened up the front door, and I opened up the screen door, and he looked at me, and he said, oh, you got a job, didn't you? I was horrified. So I knew I didn't have to take it. Everybody that loves me called me and said, no, you don't have to take this job. Wait for a real job is what my family kept saying. Get a real job. But I went to bed that night feeling pretty secure that I didn't have to take the job. But I dreamt about it, and I processed it until finally I sat up in bed in the middle of the night and I said, Greg, I think I have to take this job. And he said, maybe, because you've been talking about it in your sleep all night. And I did that a lot for many nights. And then I went out into my living room where it was really dark, and I said out loud, why me? Why do I have to take this job? And I got the strangest thought race through my body. And the loudest voice said, why not you? You have had a lifetime of trials and triumphs. You'll be good at this. And so I accepted. And then spent 11 years in terror and joy and sadness and exhilaration.
So it's a different experience than probably any other school teachers in the country. Maybe there are a handful of educators around the country who are in the same experience, but you have something that no one else goes through.
Well, at the time, absolutely, because we were the only one and the first one. Groups were starting to create these schools. But at that point, really no one knew what to do. No one knew how to treat what I was doing. I was answering to the Salt Lake City School District, and I was answering to the Travelers Aid Society, who ran the shelter. And I was this sweet, tender school teacher who represented the children, and it was a conflict back and forth of where I fit in, and I was always rallying for the children's needs and for what they needed. So I was 23 years old, having to be in charge of everything.
You started this 12 years ago.
So yes, when I was just 30. What's been really fun about it is I built the experience, loved the experience, wrote about it, had the movie made, and have been talking and teaching and loving, being an advocate for these people for 20 years.
Let's talk about the kids. They are experiencing hardship that kids in this country, at least, don't experience. How was their spirits? What was that like?
That's a really interesting question because it depended upon your age. If you were K-1-2, you could look at it, and I won't tell you every child is the same, but you could look at it as a really fun camping experience. You had a lot of friends, everybody congregated in the family area together, they ate dinner together. It didn't occur to them as intensely as it did with the older kids that it was not okay. So the older children, who tended to be very bright, not only street bright, but educationally really quite bright, were horrified by it. And they would say things like, I feel like a fish in a fishbowl when people come to see how sad the poor homeless children are. And that would break my heart. And so we practiced doing things that empowered them. I took them to the ballet. I took them to out to dinner and showed them which forks to use, and just took them to many places to teach them that they belonged out there. They were important kids. And I didn't realize how great that was until they grew older and became parents and started finding me. And nobody ever calls me and says, gosh, you were a great math teacher or a great writing teacher. And I really thought I was. But none of them call me and say that. What they say is, you believed in me. You told me over and over again that I was amazing. And I really believed it.
So you were really an advocate. That was your overarching role.
I wanted them to understand that they had the power to rise above it all. That it didn't have to be a generational behavior. That it didn't have to be, you're stuck. You're stuck. This is what your family does.
When you're talking about this, it makes me like, it's so incredible that you've been able to do this, and I'm excited to talk about your book and what you write about in your book. But this is some of the stuff that I wish our normal public schools did with kids, because yes, it's important to learn math and English and science and all those things, but it's more important to learn that, because we all go through trials, we all have these things, and some way worse than others, but we're not given skills like that
right
in normal education systems. Like, it's just learn, and then good luck with your life. And it would be so incredible if there were more teachers that saw that, or that had the capability to do things like that.
Well, there's some really interesting research out there that says that when teachers build emotional relationships with their students, they tend to learn better.
Right.
And I don't know that at that young age
and that's
that
what
came to me.
That's what happened to me. I didn't have an emotional relationship with the nuns who were beating me.
Yeah.
And deservedly so, because I was a horrible kid. But anyway, I'll not digress.
But there's some real truth to building those emotional connections to students. They tend to ask more questions. They tend to be more comfortable in the classroom. I found that these children would literally sit in my doorway, sometimes on each other, all cuddled up into that doorway, waiting for me to open the door. And it used to really throw me that they would wait right there. And I asked one of the students one day, why do you guys all sit here? And a fifth grade boy said, because this is childhood and we don't get a lot of that.
Wow.
So getting in that classroom, and that's why I've always giggled that I'm actually a good reading teacher and a good writing teacher, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted some stability.
So your school was basically under I-15 at 6 South initially?
Yep, it was under the 6 South Bridge, which is no longer there. It was about 455 West, and they were, the living quarters were boxcars. There were 12 of them. And then inside of this big silver shed with rust dripping down the front, it's quite a picture to see, was the day area and where the nursing facilities were and the school. And so I remember pulling up that very first day saying to myself, you're lost. There's nothing that resembles a school here. And a 12-year-old boy jumped out of one of the boxcars and ran right in front of my parked car and began to tie a shoelace. So I'm pretty bold by nature, so I rolled the window down and I was going to yell, hey, buddy, where's the school? And this young man stood and he glared at me. And I panicked and I said to myself, don't run him over, just turn and get on the other street as fast as you can. But just as I was trying to turn, my first dad came to the window, to my passenger window. And his name was Jim. And Jim did not look at all like I wanted homeless people to look. He had a long gray beard. And he looked too old to be the dad, but he actually turned out to be one of the dads. And he leaned down into the window and knocked to try to get my attention. And I noticed on the side of his beard was this huge chunk of scrambled egg. And he kept leaning in to knock, and the egg would touch the window. And I let out this horrible scream. And he came out around to my side. He interacted with that young man for a minute. But he came around to my side of the window, and he smiled at me and just stared. And then he said, you lost? And I said, yeah. And then with the funniest smile, he had two teeth, one right up here and one right down here. He said, are you the new teacher? And mostly I wanted to lie, but I was. And he opened up the car door and he said, come on, we're dying to meet you.
Aww.
So that was kind of my opening to a scary-looking man wanting to help me. I remember handing him my briefcase, my purse, and my wire basket, because all my friends said that all good teachers carry a wire basket. So here he is holding all of my stuff, and he looks me up and down, and I'm in a navy blue suit. I'm in navy blue tights, navy blue pumps. I have my leather briefcase, and he goes, oh, who hired you? And I had to defend myself as I'm walking in there, and he points to the shed and said, this is where you teach, and you're too proper for the streets, so teach and go home. And I'll never forget that day. But this cute gentleman did something knowing that I was young. He asked me to follow him. He said, I've got some people that want to meet you. Follow me. And he put his hand on my shoulder, and he took me to the far side of the bridge. I will tell you the 56-year-old woman would not follow him today, but I walked all the way to the far side of the bridge, and there stood about 15 moms and dads, and it was terrifying to me. And as I got into the circle, Gretchen opened the circle, and she said, honey, you're shaking. Are you cold? I wasn't cold. I was terrified. But I'll never forget what they said, and I think your listeners need to understand this. I was worried they were going to ask me if I could teach their kid to read. I was afraid they were going to say, oh, my kid doesn't read or he needs better spelling help. But not one parent said that to me. Every single one of them, in their own unique way, said, my child has suffered a lot. Could you love him? Wow. And it was the most amazing interaction, because I left that circle saying, okay, I'll be all right. I can do that. I will spend all of my energy making sure your kid knows he's okay. And that, it was kind of like an answer saying, hey, this is what these families want. They also told me something naughty about their child, which delighted me, because I always say that I've got a magnet on my forehead that's invisible that says, if you're full of it, If you need to tell me a joke when it is not appropriate to do so, I want to be your teacher. And I truly was the perfect personality for these kids, because I would have to turn my head many times and smile when a very reasonable teacher would not be smiling. So I loved them. I found them hilarious. And as they got older and became parents and would find me, I'm amazed at what they remember. Absolutely amazed.
Wow. Yeah. This is a heck of a story.
Right.
When we come back from break, what are we going to do?
We're going to introduce the book and talk a little bit about your show, the movie that came out, and I want to hear another couple stories because I know that there's some great ones that you have.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
In summer 2004, as a 4-year-old Caleb's body emerged from an overcrowded water park's pool in Utah, every mother's worst nightmare became reality for Chalese Stevens. Would healing ever begin? Without an answer, she experienced truths about deep loss and grief's throttle. By age 40, she awakened to joy and motherhood. Finding 40, available on Amazon and wherever digital copies are sold.
Welcome back to Coffee Talk Tuesday. My name again is Chalese Stevens, and I'm here with my co-host Trip Mitchell and our incredible, blessed guest, Stacey Bess.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being on our show.
So, Stacey, you were talking about how amazing it was in the beginning, and you talked about the kids and their parents and stuff. Do we do enough for homeless youth in our culture?
I think we're getting really better at it, a whole lot better at it than we used to. We have liaisons from the shelter to the school, from the school to the shelter. We got rid of all of the rules that said if you don't have the correct records when you show up to a school. We have given wherever your car is parked is your address. I mean, they have come a long way. And I think that's why the shelter school isn't there anymore, because we have learned so much and policy has been changed that allows these kids to have what they need. I am hoping, I won't tell you for sure, that teachers and students in the schools these kids go to are welcoming and kind, because homeless children tend to divulge more information than they should. Kind of like you and I, when we're really struggling, we tend to share things that people could use against us or hurt us. And it's awfully embarrassing to pull up in the van from the shelter or in...
Especially when kids get to 5 or 6.
Absolutely.
Grade 5 or 6.
They get to an age where they're very aware of
class.
And we stop at your shelter to pick you guys up after we're picked up. So those are the things I'm always worried about. That stops kids from wanting to walk in the building. But no, I've heard many good things about how much they're working with our homeless children.
And Salt Lake, so it sounds like Salt Lake School District was way ahead of districts around the country.
I felt like they were. The Road Home came to the Salt Lake City School District and said, hey, we're documenting hundreds of kids that are falling through the cracks. And Salt Lake City School District stood up and said, well, then let's try something. It's a unique thing. Let's try to place education right inside your shelter and catch those kids who would otherwise fall through the cracks. Now, I will tell you, when I speak all over the country, I'm always faced with somebody that says that is unequal. You cannot have a school in a shelter. And because of experience, I will tell you I will agree with that. But I will also tell you that we give these families, we always gave them the opportunity to keep their children where they were or to place them in a school in the area. I bent over backwards to get those kids to the school they needed to be in. So it was strictly an opportunity to save those children who would not otherwise get the education they needed. And quite honestly, we were the most watched school ever. We had University of Utah students from the Benyon Center every day. Every kid almost had an adult in the room that was helping them. We were studied by the University of Utah. We had great moms that didn't have anything in their own kids' school, or maybe their kids had grown up and that wanted to be our PTA leaders. So we were watched a lot and studied.
Well, and you wrote this incredible book, Nobody Doesn't Love Nobody. And in it, it's a compilation of just stories of your children, right? Of the kids that you...
You know, Chalese, I'm going to give you an amazing compliment.
I always hesitate when you're going to do this.
You are the best reader I know. You've got this wonderful book, and it looks like you've never read it all the way through. You read and then close it in the right position.
Well, actually, my book is in the back. I'm glad that she brought another one.
Oh, okay, good.
It's got like water on it. But no, this is the book. And was this what was turned into the movie?
It was. And so let me just tell you a little bit about, I wasn't actually writing a book. I was keeping a journal. And every night I would sit down at my desk and write about these incredible kids. And I kept thinking, these guys have amazing stories, and they are resilient, and they're powerful, and they have so much to say. And so every night I'm writing about families. And then I had some children live with me while their mommy was in rehab and their daddy was in prison. And I had many children live with me. And so I was writing about these kids saying, wow, I have learned so much. So then a friend called me and said, I dare you to take this to a publisher. You have an incredible story. And they bought it. It was pretty remarkable to have them believe that I had a message to tell.
The kids that got to stay with you, did they feel like they hit the mother load?
You know, it was interesting. We live in an upper middle class neighborhood, and we put them in some pretty remarkable schools. And everything I had been saying to my husband about how unkind we adults can be, even when we're not aware, my husband got to see. So my husband Greg took Robert. We had 3 beautiful children come live with us while their mommy was in rehab and their daddy was in prison. And I took the 2 to my own children's elementary school, the 2 younger ones, and then I asked Greg if he would enroll Robert at the junior high. And he got there, and the lady said, the secretary, Mr. Bess, you realize this is a very upper level junior high. This child will never succeed. And Greg said it took everything I had to stay calm as I watched this beautiful young man who believed he was on top of the world and that he could...
She said this in front of him?
In front of him.
Wow.
Do we have this woman's name and address?
No, we don't. And we're very careful with that.
But I want to know where you live.
But I want you to understand that, guess who was amazing? The kids, the students, the neighbors. At the elementary level, the resource teacher brought her husband to meet them. There were plenty of people who loved them and who gave them everything that they needed to be successful. The tragedy of that little group is after 4 months, Mom and Dad had done what they were told to do, and we were to give them back. And that was painful. We delivered them back, and then at Christmas time, I went to give them presents, and they were gone. And it broke my heart.
Have you ever seen them again?
So yes, I have. So they left. Didn't hear from them for 3 or 4 years, and then one morning I had just gotten home from a doctor's appointment, and they said, you may have skin lymphoma. And I had little bruises all over me. And they biopsied it, and I came home and I was all alone, and I kind of yelled out loud, why me? I thought I was doing so much in this world. And the telephone rang. And Robert, the oldest, was on the other end, and I was standing in my office, and I heard this older male voice say, Mama, it's Robert.
Oh.
And I just slid down the wall and started to cry. And he said, Opal's on the other end. We just wanted to tell you, you were the best mama we ever had. And that's all I needed. They didn't know I was struggling. But we talked for a long time, and they Facebook with me all the time, and they want.
How are they doing now?
They're doing well. Opal was going to paralegal school. Robert had held the same job for 7 years. Wow. Tony, at this point, I believe he's out of prison, but he was our most beloved child. He was tender. He was so cute, and he could not read. And it didn't matter how hard I worked and how many hours my volunteers worked with him. Because of the way the mama lived while she was pregnant, he could not
So
get that
he
information.
had disability due to her consuming drugs or alcohol while...
Yeah, and all the moving back and forth and in and out of foster care. So we talk a lot. They write to me a lot. That young man that was kneeling before my car that day calls me a lot. We talk. He lives in Alaska. He wrote to me on my 50th birthday. I had not heard from him. I'd looked for him. He was beautiful. He lived with us for a while. And he wrote to me. I opened it up and he said, to my favorite rock star teacher, I'll call you later.
How many kids lived with you and your husband and your kids?
So let's see. We'll do it in groups. I had Maria lived with me while her daddy had been kicked out of the shelter. So she came to live with me for a while. Beautiful little girl. Matter of fact, her life is shown in the movie, and that's the number one question I get asked is, do you ever see her? And I have never been able to find her. I have written her name on every list I can find, and there's many with her real name, and you should know I changed their names so that I can keep their privacy. And then Zachary, who was kneeling before my car that day, stayed with us for a while. And then the 3 children.
Wow.
Yeah.
And your kids, what did they think of the experience?
You know, I won't paint a really rosy picture. They loved them deeply. I did allow Opal to wear one of Nicole's dresses once, and she showed up to school in one of Nicole's favorite dresses, and that was a sister fight.
Okay.
But I remember laying on the bed with my oldest boy, Brandon, and his 6th grade teacher said, you can get double points if you'll read out loud with your mom, which they never, 6th graders don't read out loud with their mom. And I said, hey, bud, you've never read my book. Do you want to do that? Let's do that. And we were reading Opal, Tony, and Robert's story. And he was such a cool dude and didn't want to cry in front of his mom. And I look over about halfway through the chapter, and he's got big tears rolling down his cheeks. And I said, buddy, tell me what you're feeling. And he said, I loved them. I really loved them. And I thought, oh, we really did do great things for you two. Now, I will tell you that I've had 6 children, and Mackenzie was part of this. So the first 3 got to be part of it and got to feel the joy of serving. My last 3 have felt the joy of living in a wonderful home in a wonderful neighborhood and having a swimming pool. And I don't want to say they're not nearly as aware of other people's needs, but boy, did the first 3 get that knowledge of how important we are to each other.
You know, one of the reasons why I'm so excited to have you on this show is because you actually inspired me to finish my book, because 16 years ago, I lost my son, and I kept journal entries with intentions to one day write a book. Mm-hmm. And when you did this, and it was like stories and things like that, that's what I wanted my book to be, journal entries and stories. And so you were a huge inspiration to me. So
thank
you for that. And
this is really an amazing story.
Well,
who played you who played in the movie?
So Emily Van Camp played me. And the kids, Gerald Mullen, who is the executive producer of Schindler's List and Jurassic Park, was the first to own my rights. And he called me one day and said, I'm coming to the Marriott. I would love to meet you. And so at first I thought it was my husband teasing me. And So then I went to the Marriott and met him, and he bought the rights, and then he shopped it throughout Hollywood. And so then he called one day and he said, "Who would you like to play you?" And I said, "Jerry, I got to tell you, I'm not a big movie watcher, so tonight I'll talk to my boys about it." And I have 4 boys that are very manly, and they all said, "Megan Fox should play you." And I said, "She's beautiful, but I kind of like somebody that comes across, kind of teacherish." And they said, no, she's really sexy. And I said, "Well, guys, I'm not really that concerned about how sexy she is." And then Jerry said, "I think I found the most wonderful woman. Her name's Emily Van Camp. She's a star. She's amazing." And on the first day of filming, she was so tender. And so she said to me, "I want to play you as who you are. And there's no one who would have gotten through that in 11 years without being feisty." And I smiled and said, "Uh-huh." She said, "Can I please play you as feisty?" And I said, "Yeah." And then she got a little bit teary and she said, "Stacey, I love teachers. I love education. I'm terrified to play you." And I said, "You'll be amazing." And then I had the headphones on, sitting in the director's chair with the director, and I'm not kidding you, her voice was identical to my voice.
Those people are amazing. We have run out of time.
Oh my goodness. Well, you speak all over the nation, and is there anything that you would like to, any websites or anything that people can go to
Yes.
to get a hold of you if they need to?
So I'd love lots of opportunities to speak. You can go to www.staceybess.com. You can email me. I think if you Google me, there's lots of ways to find me.
Perfect. Awesome.
Well,
Right.
This has been an amazing half hour.
I know. I'm like
Thank
totally
you.
filled. I needed this today more than you know. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, please go comment, like, share our video or podcast, and you guys can view this. If you want to see it on YouTube, you can view it on YouTube or any of the stations that have podcast, Spotify, iTunes, all that stuff. So thank you guys and have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.